African communism, Marxism, socialism, Ethiopianism, feminism, which are oxymoronic. They are oxymoronic, as far as the African traditional, authenticity of our being, is concerned. You have so-called African traditional churches today. You have so-called Black Islam today. You have, what is called Black theology today. And these were resultant effects of this non-starter discourse. So I want to talk about the Negro/Black nationalism and Pan-Africanism with, the aforementioned, as the backdrop to what I want to bring to your attention. So Black nationalism and Pan-Africanism now, although the former, and that is Black nationalism, is on a strong leaning, or posture of race consciousness, race-centeredness, and separatism. It was inceptionally plagued, with this kind of spiritual-cultural misorientation and surrogate intellectualism, at least on their race thesis, and that is the Black nationalist movement. They were on point. The race-centered, race-conscious stance that they took kind of pioneered a pathway that would later on lead to those of us who would begin the process of detoxifying from anything European, be it, an intellectual tradition, be it a religion or any normative system you can think of as irrelevant in addressing the problems of African people. These are paradigms of dislocation. We see them as such today, that those who preceded us could not see or willfully chose to ignore. This is your Black nationalism and Pan-Africanism. Although I give the race-centered, race-conscious stance, posture to Black nationalism, it has to be mentioned that it is just not enough to have this cursory zeal for race unity without a life force that centers or grounds the race in its authentic, upright, cosmic self. So, African-centeredness should not be confused with Pan-Africanism, should not be confused with Black nationalism, should not be confused with African nationalism and Black consciousness. No, it shouldn't. African-centeredness should not be confused with these. These are mere intellectual reactions to white terror domination that without, I must emphasize, that without the foregrounding in African-centeredness, have nothing to offer in both the African liberation phenomenology and African restoration. That one has to be clear. It has to be so clear that even a fool, cannot. And one may ask then, what is African-centeredness then? If Pan-Africanism and Black nationalism are judged by this paradigm as non-starters. African-centeredness is to be grounded as we are taught by Baba Olatunji Mwamba, is to be grounded in the working knowledge of our uncompromised indigenous African traditions. It is to be crystal clear about the fact that our indigenous African traditions are purely African, and for this reason we should interpret the world through the paradigmatic understanding of our African ancestors. So African-centeredness can, be further said to be thinking about and acting on all planes of reality as our ancestors would, knowing that they are we and we are them. That is African-centeredness. That is African-centeredness. So, despite all the cursory references that have throughout history been made to African-centeredness, someone had to come up with a crystallized definition of what, African-centeredness is. That even those who have referred to their works or other people's works as African-centered, with the crystallized definition, can have their work evaluated to check as to whether, in spite of their use of the term African-centeredness or the adjective African-centered, the work that they engaged in was really African-centered. You can't be African-centered and be a Christian. You can't be African-centered and be a Muslim. You can't be African-centered and be a communist, a Marxist, or whatever leftist, intellectual garbage, there may be. You can't be African-centered. Embracing these paradigms is treasonous to the African autonomous thought. It is, as in the words of, one of our brothers in this African-centered warrior discourse, Akofena. So we are raising the bar. We are raising the bar. And the work, engaged in here is simply the work of cleaners, floor sweepers. And those of you who feel that this stifles efforts of building should focus on your assignments and leave us cleaners, floor, sweep, the floors, and mop, the floors, so that you can come build on a clean slate.